Okay. Actually, for some reason I had it in my head that the talk was 20 minutes. So I was like, oh shit. So I compacted my slides, and then I was like, oh, it's 30. So I thought I would give a quick update on MotionKit kind of before the main talk. But
You don't want me to introduce you?
no, that's okay too.
Okay. Hello, guys. So I have to introduce Colin because he cannot introduce himself, right? That would be weird. So Colin here is going to talk about ap-
There you go.
he's going to talk about two things, right? How to organize and manage your API requests, and how to keep your user interface in sync with the data. Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Colin has been a long-time member, as you know, right? He wrote a few of the early gems. And now Colin is working for a company called Hello, and he's writing Swift code. So, ooh.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but he still like Ruby Motion,
Yes.
and he will try to synthesize what he learned. And
Exactly. Yeah.
so thank you for coming, Colin.
Thank you. Thank you, Laurent. And yeah, that's exactly it. What I hope to do is kind of show there are some things that we can learn from Swift, from some tools that have come out of Swift. Um, they're good ideas, regardless of what language you use. And I'm happy to talk about the pluses and minuses of Swift development and traditional Xcode development, after. No, no, I didn't. Oh, yes. They paid for, Elo sponsored my trip. And I said, the background I do just like. I did tell them I would wear a shirt. And I do have the logo in like the corner of the slides, things like that. But because I have a little bit of extra time, I thought I would give an update on MotionKit at the end. So when we had Teacup, and it was complicated and it was hard to maintain, and there were no other maintainers. So I wanted to create MotionKit, and I wanted it to be a kind of synthesis of a lot of styling frameworks. So kind of take these ideas from Teacup and RMQ and promotion style sheets, and I said, hey, everybody, let's all work on this thing. And everyone said, oh, we don't like it. And I was like, all right, well. So I worked on it. I did it anyway because I wanted something that was a new layer, this layer outside the controller, kind of sits outside the normal iOS place, a way to slim the controller. So last year I talked about using that as a tool for creating the layout, kill the controllers. So I really like this idea of kind of app architecture and having your code very organized. So that's what I'm going to talk about again this year. Since then, I think style sheets have been solved by RMQ. So I'm kind of saying I'm good with that. I'm done with that. I still like MotionKit because it does something that I don't think other gems do, which is the view model layer. And it's so MotionKit 2. Oh, also MotionKit 1 could not be cross-platform. It just wasn't possible. It was too much meta-programming. Android just doesn't support it yet. So MotionKit 2, I'm working on it. I actually did Motion Create MotionKit 2. It's like fresh. So it is not backwards compatible. It looks like this. The constraints, I was like, I have this new idea. They'll be cross-platform. Since then, kind of talking to Jamin, I'm going to take them out and be a separate gem. And hopefully, it'll be an RMQ constraints gem, because that's what I think it should be. But they will probably look something like this. We'll see, DSL-wise. But the important thing for MotionKit is to focus on, I want to point out this line. So the idea of a controller giving data to the layout and having it bound to many views. So you can throw data at your layout, and the controller just needs to do the handoff. And the layout, in this case, would be responsible for putting it where it needs to go. It might style it, it might animate it, whatever would kind of be inside that block, which could be a method called. So this is binding the text property of this label to the time accessor up there. And of course, that could be a symbol, but in this case, we've got it. A big change from MotionKit 1 is that the instance is passed in. This is much more kind of RMQ style, and I think it gives better backtraces. So yeah, a little bit in store for MotionKit 2. And I'm sorry, it's not backwards compatible. It just doesn't make sense to do it that way. Yeah, yeah, I'm pulling an Angular. Okay, so that's it for that. Brought to you by Elo. So yeah, I've been working at Elo since February. A team of 5 developers. Pretty much, the app was started in Swift, by the way. I made an argument. It was a good argument, but there was already code there. There was just no winning. Plus, we were hiring contractors, and they knew Swift, they knew Xcode. Okay. But now I'm really glad. There's a lot to learn from Swift. We'll go into that. The Elo app was written, so February, we launched in June. We've had 100,000 plus downloads, I think, since then. So huge launch, biggest that I've ever been a part of. We were featured in the App Store. Yeah, 4 days is how long it took to get to 100,000 downloads. And less than like 0.5% were bug reports came in. Extremely stable app. I think a huge part of that was the 2 things I'm going to present, especially the view model layer, which I'll talk about. Oops, there we go. There's me. And I'll do my background. I started in TI Basic on a calculator. So I always love when people can talk about TI Basic. Moved to QBasic, moved to C++. I was just like super excited. In kind of college era, got into Objective-C. I was actually using Application Builder and Interface Builder when they were separate apps and pre-Xcode, which I think was the best time. It was super cool. Core Data was released, and that was exciting. Then I learned PHP so I could do a job interview where I told them I was an expert. I hope they don't watch. No, it's true. Then we switched to Python. I was on PHP and Python. Then I went to Remotion, had a lot of joy, and now I'm doing Swift. And I think you saw my handles. I'm Colin, TA, everywhere. So the Elo app. What we had to do is, so here we've got a profile, and it has a stream of posts, like you would look on Twitter. Here's a noise feed. It's a type of feed. You can have friends in noise. And it's a stream of posts with a different layout. And here's notifications. It's a stream of notifications. All these come in through the API using a really, really similar results. The things you get in are really similar. So we had to solve this problem over and over again. So tons of reuse. Actually, like 90% of the app relies on one stream view controller that is composable. Each of these contains one. And so all these patterns emerge from it. 2 patterns in particular. First one, we learned from a project called Moya to have a request provider. And what you do is you instantiate a provider. It's a very simple object. We'll see it. And you hand it, and what's important is you hand it an enumeration. So in this case, we're saying, I'm going to do a GitHub request, and I want to get the status. And this is what it would look like, something like this in Ruby. What it allows us to do in the context of streams is here we can say notification endpoint. And we hand that to the stream view controller. Here we say noise stream endpoint. And here we say profile with a Colin TA value. So we would say, and this is something that Swift enumerations can do. They can say profile with an associated value. What did you call them? Discriminated union. So yeah, they have a few different names. It's very cool. So then you have one generic thing, and it allowed all of these to use the exact same code. And in fact, when we built search, it was my task. I opened it up, created search, added the stream view controller, gave it a property of search endpoint with an associated value of the query, loaded it, it worked. You could scroll, you could paginate, you could pull to refresh, you could tap everything. I was done in 20 minutes, and it took the web team 2 days to do the equivalent work. So it's a huge time saver. Oh, there you go. Well, he did a good job. Long story short, the language is nice, the tools are terrible. Terrible tools. The compiler. View model layer. So a motion kit is a view model layer. And basically what you're doing is you're saying, you get some models in, they're traditional models, and you don't hand those to the view. The view's not ready for them. A view doesn't know what a user is. That's your land, right? That's app land. What you hand to the view is a view model. So in this case, throughout the app, we use stream cell items. They have an associated model, right? So once you're kind of parsing, once you're handing data to these cells, they need the original model. Another way to do this would be to hand in specific properties, but I think this is a common pattern. And then you would give some metadata about that stream cell. What role does it have? So all of these take a user, but what are they presenting for that user? Maybe it's the avatar, maybe it's their bio, maybe it's their, can you comment on this user or not? That kind of thing would go in the footer. And then you pass those models to your data source. And so the data source would handle inserting them, adding them to the end, and so on. So how do you get to this point, right? Why do you need this complication? Because when you start, it's pretty easy to build an app, hook it up to an API service, and get some results. You're ready to go, right? This app, I'm gonna be done in no time. And it'll probably look something like this. You pull up view did load, you grab your feed, you get your feed, you create your feed objects, and you reload your data. You're ready, right? But some things might get in the way. So now you say, okay, well now I'm ready to implement adding a new comment, deleting, pull to refresh, and so on. And all these things have all the unintended consequences of what starts off as simple code, right? So yeah, you're checking everywhere. Am I in the middle of reloading? Do I need to guard against this? All these globals, because notifications might come in, and do I need to add something in all over the place? So with a view model layer and with separating your API, the way we're going to do it here, you get a lot of benefits. And there's actually even more wrong with that. For instance, the API feed, I've got the endpoint kind of locked into my code. Oops, there it is. I've deserialized my feed from JSON objects into feed objects. And I've got this long request block that I probably got scattered throughout the controller. None of these are desired. So what you gain with a request provider, you can have one place where you list all your endpoints. So everything that your app supports can be in this class-like object, right? Think of it as module constants or class constants. There they are. The data associated with those endpoints, the URL, their HTTP type, how they are parsed, so what you'll get and what you'll get back out, all of that can be put in there. Now you've got one place where you can say, what if I want these certain types of requests to be in this operation queue? I don't want them to overlap. I want one to finish before the next one starts. You've got a place to do that. So you have a provider class that can queue those up. Deserialization. So you're not saying, how do I deserialize my feed objects? That's actually stored in the API, and the provider knows how to talk to the API to say, hey, what do I do with these now? Great. Okay, get feed objects out. And then, yeah, thread and queue. So what do you do on the background? Is that where you do your JSON parsing? And what do you put, how does that get back to the UI? It gets put on the main thread, so you can handle that things there. And cancelability, usually by returning a cancelable object from the provider. And you get this. This is huge. This is what allowed us to have less than 1% of users get crashes. A provider, when you say, okay, don't talk to the server, use stub responses, and it can have that as metadata again. You can have error responses. You can have successful responses. You can queue responses. So you can say, first I'm going to ask you for login. You're going to fail. Then I'm going to ask you to sign up. You're going to succeed. Then I'm going to ask you to log in with those credentials, and you're going to pass. What does my controller do? So you can test the behavior of your controller, but set up a known situation. So of course, in this situation, you're testing your API separately, and you're testing your controller with known responses from your server. And then if you are using a web framework that doesn't use promises and futures, who cares, because you have one class where all your requests go to. So if you want to use those, you can opt in, and you don't have to rely on someone else's library to have those for you. So they would look something like this. This is kind of some pseudo code that we'll work with. Create a new class. This would be a status endpoint like before. The URL for this endpoint, the idea is that we're passing in this constant status here. We'd switch on it and return the URL. Imagine this in a much bigger file with all of your endpoints, and this is pretty much repeated. So You'd have a URL method. It would return the proper URL. A stub response method, return the proper stub responses. The feed deserialization, you'd have all that code. And of course, you can break this out in with discriminated unions. There's elegant ways to do it using like extensions and things, but and then your provider code looks something like this. So you hand it this LOAPI instance. You get the URL from it. You get the metadata about that request. You fire it off. You ask the endpoint to parse it, and then you send that to the callback. So from the controller, oh, and then there's this. So from the controller, you just need to say, send the request, and I will take a response or an error. And all that information about where that thing goes and how it's parsed, you get an error, or you get feed objects, or status object, or whatever that is. And then your tests can do very cool things. You can say, this login is going to fail, submit, and this should happen. So controllers testing gets much less painful. And of course, it works well with the whole view model thing. So just to kind of reiterate, you're not coding your request, parsing, all that in your controllers. That's separate. That's often your providers. So they're based on the endpoint data. You get stub responses. I think I've said all this. This one is too complicated to get into, but if you're familiar with NS operations, NS operation queues, you can set up dependencies with those, and all that code can live in your provider class. So again, you have these two classes, the provider and the API enumeration. These enumerations sound great. They're not possible in pure, what do I want to say, off-the-shelf Ruby. You need something to build them. So I took a stab at this a while ago, and it's like, what do I call these really smart enums? I came up with Einstein enum. It's a work in progress. What is on GitHub works. You can switch on it, and it's heavily inspired. This is pretty much what Swift enums taste like. These are your not the discriminated data, not the associated data, but calculated properties. These are the default values for those. So in this case, I'm going to say, when I ask post for their, or posting, I guess I should say, for their HTTP method, I'm not going to use the default. I'm going to override that. Here, this one's different. This is saying, I want user to have an associated value, and that's going to be their ID number, or identifier of some sort. And then when you ask me for the URL, I want you to put it in there. Right? So this would be a calculated property, and this would be an associated value. If you need a sub response, fetch some JSON based on the name. That would be status as a string. And if you need the URL, start with the base and add the URL, which is the default would be /status. Actually, I don't think this is a good idea. We certainly don't do it. We just have URL values for each one. You could also define a method that says, like we did before, you say case endpoint when status return /status. You can, and this is what Einstein enum looks like. So you can instantiate this value. You can get its URL. You can get the JSON out. You can create, and here's what that associated value looks like. So you actually put that inside the enum value, and then it passes, it gets sent along with that enum. It still feels very much like an enum value, but it's got some data that you can pull out of it. And yeah, the URL and full URL. So this is very possible, and I do plan on supporting this thing because it's a very good idea. Okay, so let's go back to that view model layer. Why do we need this kind of difference? We can write views that support our models. So what's the advantage of that view model layer? So again, we've got a table, and we've got data coming back from the server. And this makes the pretty safe assumption that your table is an array, and each cell represents one entry in that array. Yeah, well, that's not always the case. So in this case, we've got the author, and we're going to want to display that. They have two parts in this post. This is a text body with HTML, so this is a UI web view here. And then we've got the image as well. So these come in as separate objects. Then we've got things you can do with that post. In this case, I tapped comment, and I was starting to, I would tap this to add a comment. Here's something someone wrote. So yeah, this starts off looking pretty good, but okay, now I need to split it up, or I need to put all these cells into one massive cell. I need to add and remove that add comment. So do I expand my cell? So when you have this one-to-one with your cell and your model, you're either going to have a massive cell whose height changes and is really complicated, or it's just not going to work. Yeah, and so yeah, you just got too much data. This is not true. And I think in most apps this actually breaks down. In very few is the cell to model ratio maintained. You often have these other things, and unless you can write complicated cells, that's okay. I don't think it's good though. I think very small cells that do very small things is a good idea. So instead, what we'll do with these view models, we get our models back from the server, and we're going to map reduce. We're going to turn them into more objects. Some posts, like notifications, it's always one-to-one. One notification is one cell. It's very easy. But with posts, some will have 4, some will have 3. I think the minimum is 2. We get view models out that wrap that model and add view-related data. So that's how we get this where, yeah, here one post is now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and actually probably more. And I actually colored this wrong. This here is a margin, and that's actually its own cell item that has no associated model. So you can even do into 0, where you have spacers and things. And you say, no problem, I'll use a view model for that. It does have view information, the height of that margin. It doesn't have any model to back it up. Totally cool. So yeah, each view usually has one view model. I don't think that should be broken. I'm not big on, never do that, but I don't think that should ever be broken. So yeah, models map back and forth. And what goes into the view model is, yeah, cell size, model attributes that you need, maybe data from the current user that turn on and off features. And then in the previous thing, so that we can delete cells, you'll often have grouping. So in this case, we group by the post ID. All of these cell items have a grouping ID, which is the post ID. So if this is deleted, we can tell the data source, delete everything with the group ID of this post ID, and they all go away. The comments actually have an additional grouping ID so that we can hide and remove. Actually, I think what we do is we say find all the cells that are comments with the grouping ID of the post, and then when you tap this, they show and hide. So you can get a lot of kind of features out of this because you have a new place to encapsulate this view data. And this is one, if you kind of think, I've never used a view model, this is the big secret. Every table view data source, that's your view model, right? How many rows does it have? What information is in the cell? So when we attach our models to the table directly, we're going through a view model already. So I like to have a separate class for my data source. Don't use the controller. The data source is going to be responsible for these. So yeah, when you are working with this changing data, you can have this very pretty complicated class handle the animations, where do these cells go, what state is my table in, have I already loaded pagination data, for instance, when you get to the bottom and you have a spinner. You're going to ask the data source for this. So again, lighten the controller up, and you're putting the view-specific information into the model where it's appropriate. So that's the idea. Hope it's good. Hope you find it useful. Yeah. That would be fun. No, it's yeah. You could easily have the ProMotion data source be exposed, I think. Yeah. Mm. Right. Yep. Yeah. In our app? No, we're not using core data. Like I'm going to use core data. Yeah. Right. Hmm. Right. So there's a kind of the easy way and the hard way. The easy thing we do is, uh, usually if someone deletes a post and you're looking at it, it's just going to be there. It's not going to go anywhere while you're looking at it because we're not using something like Firebase where it would be like, hey, they deleted this. However, we do have this concept where a notification can come in with an action, and so what we've done is we have what's it called? It's a system event, user experience event. So when you create a post, at the end of that post, it's all done. It fires off this event. It's a notification, and it says it's a creation. The type is post, and so on, and it's all model data at that point. Each controller is listening for that, and it says, "Oh, a post of the user." So the profile stream would say, "I need to show this. I need to do something with it," and it goes through the same pipeline that all the other data does. So usually we get an array of JSON objects. Mhm. Right. Right. The same notification. Yeah. Right. It wouldn't be any different. All we know is that each controller has no idea where this post was created. It gets a notification that a post was created. So that could come from the web. Sure. Right. Right. And it would be picked up in the exact same spot and would go through the same pipeline. You'd end up with cell items. You'd hand this to the data source. You would say insert them at the top, and they go. Or same with the delete notification. So yeah. And then it's throughout the app too. So any stream that is appropriate to display that post or to delete that post, it'll get deleted from every single one. Right. 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 So it'll do the same feature with all the overhead of core data that I just implemented. So I'm sorry, there was a benefit. I know that it can do things for you. I can do them myself. This is my attitude with a lot of Apple products. I'm like, right. Oh, actually, once we get models in, we don't really hold on to them. They go through our pipeline and they get output. And when you do an interface, now each cell item does actually hold on to the model, but there's not a central store. For that reason, there is actually we use the app database to serialize things, and then we do lookups to say like, we know that you already have this object, so go find it in this database, and we pull it out and it's a model. But yeah, we don't actually maintain an object graph in memory. They all get dropped. So when a notification comes in that says delete this post, each controller says, do I have that post? And it asks the data source, do we have this post? And it says, yeah, I have like 8 cells that are that post. And it goes, great, delete them. Okay. So there's no like update the database. There's no reason to do that. Yeah. Though we do support things where if we ask the server, hey, give me an update, it can respond with, I don't have an you already have the most recent. I think that's a 204 response. So and this doesn't interfere with that, so we can say like, okay, don't change the state, that's fine. So it's very much about state change instead of maintaining state. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The discriminated unions, actually, the kind of Einsteinian ideas. Uh, this It just doesn't. So in Ruby, everything is an object, right? That means you can't opt out of classes, and enums are not classes. They are, right. When Amir was saying that, I'm like, yeah. Sometimes they're the right answer, especially for this idea of completeness. I can describe, like for instance, if I pull up. Stop it. Okay. Okay. That's tiny. Okay, so here is what this code actually looks like. So here are all the endpoints that we use in the API. So when you create a post, actually that's a terrible one. I didn't write that code. Here's a better one. Where you say, flagging a comment, here's the information I need. What's the parent post, what's the comment ID, and what's the kind? And when we create that, we'd say, give me the value of the comment, the option kind. Actually, don't know where. Oh, yeah. So now this endpoint is no longer like an instance of this enum, right? It's a unique value of the enum. It's the final output. So you can think of it much more as a symbol. But you can ask this symbol, what is your comment post ID and what's your post ID? Like, what are the values associated with you? But the essential value is immutable, and you can pass it around, and you can ask it questions. So, like, give me the URL of this thing. Structs are actually different. Yeah, so I guess. I mean, right. It yeah, actually, it's like an immutable struct. Structs are mutable in Swift, but if it was immutable, I can't think of an obvious difference. Because you have structs, enums, and classes. Structs and enums are value types. What's that? Oh, yeah, the Einstein enum thing. Where is it? So here's actually like the current version, I think. So I was kind of like, all right, how would I do this API? The raw value is an associated value with a special name. So in Swift, if something expects a string, and you have an enum whose raw value is a string, you can hand it the enum instead of a string, and it'll pull the string out of the enum. It's just a shorthand. It's not very special. So yeah, here would be the pattern matching. And this list looks very much like Swift code, where you say switch on self and then pull out a value. So this says if the user ID number is -1. So not just is it a user, but is the value inside -1. This one would say is there a number inside? Is there a string inside? Swift doesn't support this, but Ruby is magical, so it does. Yeah. Swift, there is something nice where you would say where user ID equals that fixed num, and then you wouldn't need that. You can do that in kind of one step in Swift, but I don't, woo, that's not such a big deal. And this is explicit, which I like. So in the next version, I'm going to have it where you can say, give me the ID by name instead of just, oh, here, maybe I already support that. This should be the current version we're looking at. I wrote this months ago, to be fair. So yeah, you pull all that data out. So yeah, they're fun. No, no, yeah, I still use Sublime. I've got a plugin. So I hit Command Control L, and that says iOS or OS 10. iOS. What framework? UI kit, class, UI table. Oops, that's a UI table view. Selection allows selection. So I can actually search, and those are based on Ruby Motion Bridge support files. So I scan them, turn them into a huge JSON file, and then I can just find methods that way. So that's my autocompleter. Of course. All right, none of Sublime works like you think it should on mine. It's stupid. Plus my keyboard is different, plus sticky keys are on. Yeah. Yeah, that's on GitHub. That's. Oh, really? Oh, I was going to start with this. I meant to mention this. Ruby Motion made me the #1 Ruby developer, and when Elo hired me, it's a Rails shop, and this is one of my coworkers, and he was like, "What is that about?" Like, sorry, #1 Ruby developer in Denver, and it's totally Ruby Motion. I've never written Rails. I don't know how. So I thought that was pretty fun. Another thing is that people have been saying in this conference it's more popular than Bubble Wrap. It needs to be more popular than SugarCube. It's 163,000 downloads. So that's the elephant in the room. All right. Oh, fair enough. Well, then by that metric, I'm the #1 Ruby developer in Denver, and I use SugarCube. No, I'm kidding. I don't care what you use. I'm just kidding. I just up enter. Colin TA. Oh no, that's not the one. What was the one we were going to look at? Oh yeah, it's called Motion Lookup. Look it up. Yeah, there it is. And there's also the parser, the thing that converts. Yeah. This converts all the bridge support files into a big JSON file, but the JSON file is in here, I think. Where did or copy the file from my downloads folder? I don't know what that means. I think I meant to include a link to my website, but as far as I know, I'm the only person who uses it. So, yep. All right. Thanks, everybody. Oh, and stick around. Let's drink beer. I don't know if you're as hot as I am. I am boiling.